Hi, today we're working on our modern Dresden pattern. So get ready because we're going to turn all those little pieces into a plate today. Join us, we'll be right back. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi, thanks for coming back. Today we're talking about our modern Dresden project that we're working on. And you know, last time I showed you how to make the pieces with the pointy tops and then the pieces with the roundy tops. So we've got all these pieces, and what we want to do is we want to turn them into a plate. So this is really easy. What we have, first of all, is we have a bunch of blades with rounded tops, and we need to hook them together. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to put them together, right sides touching, and we're going to kind of line up the little rounded part at the top, and we're going to line up the raw edges here on one side. And then we're going to stick a pin in it. Oh, I don't like that pin. It's kind of thick and fat, and it's hard to get in. So we're lined up here, and we're lined up here. Now that curve on the top might not line up just exactly right, but that's okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it in our machine. I'm using today the 1/4-inch foot with the little fabric guide on one side, and I'm going to change my settings to the 1/4-inch seam, and I'm going to start this with that raw edge of the fabric, this part right here, lining up on the side of that foot. And I'm going to start it so that the first time the needle comes down, it doesn't come down on fabric. It's going to come down just shy of that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing. And we're going to take a couple of stitches, and we're going to let it back up one stitch, and actually did two. That's one of the things about this machine. You can never quite just get one stitch. And then I'm just going to sew it all the way down that raw edge. And I'm using kind of a smallest stitch. It's a 2.4. Usually when my machine comes up, the default is 1.8, so I make it just a little bit bigger than that. Because if you do need to adjust these and you have to take out a 1.8 seam, it's very difficult. So now we've sewn those together. And that's what we're looking for. So you're going to have a bunch of these, and then you're going to have, because of what we're doing here on our plate, we've got 4 of our blades that have the pointy top. Now, if you put it together exactly the way the instructions on the pattern template comes, they want you to line up those little dots. But I want my pointed piece to stick out just slightly, so it's just a little bit longer than the rounded ones, just a little emphasis. So I'm lining mine up, and I don't know if you can see that, so that the pointed piece is showing above the top of the rounded piece by maybe 1/4 inch, very, very slightly. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing. We've got that lined up at the top. We're going to line up the side here. And we're going to start it the same way, with the needle coming down just outside the fabric. My foot is getting away from me there. 2 stitches, back 1. That just gives it a little bit of a tack to hold it there at the end. And then we're going to stitch down. I don't tack back at the raw edges in the middle. because that part is going to be covered. So now we have the piece with the rounded and the pointy. So they're together. Now remember, this plate that we're making is using a substitute fabric for the black and white flowered print. We're using the white for that. And normally what I would do is I would do all of these pieces like this and then take it to the ironing board and use an iron, and I do use steam with these Dresden plates because I want those seams to be open and as flat as possible. I'm just going to press it, finger press it right now. So now we have this, and we need to hook these. We took 2 pieces to make a pair and 2 pieces to make another pair, and now we're going to hook them together. And you'll need to use your pattern here to decide how they need to go together. If you're using them so that they're all the same, it won't matter. Or if you've got a random design. Okay, I've lined this up and I've lined this side just like we did before, and I'm going to sew that just like we did before. If you have problems with your machine wanting to tangle up when you start that first stitch, you might want to have a stiletto or a seam ripper handy so that you can help to guide that in. Now that one was a little messy, and I think we're going to have to take it out and put it back together again. It looks like that little curve when I did that did not come out exactly the way it should have. And it may be that it wasn't pressed out enough. But we're going to move on, and then I'll come back and fix that later. So now we've got a unit with 4 blades. And we're going to take another unit with 4 blades, and this one has already been pressed. So you can see how that one really lays nice and flat as opposed to the one we just did. And they're both exactly the same. So we're going to hook these together. And this is the way we're going to hook them right here, so we have the continuity in our pattern. And we're going to do that the same way. We're going to just let that pointy edge peek out just slightly. The other pieces should be able to match up fairly well. There may be a little bit of difference in the way they come together. And that's okay because we're only making one seam. The only place that this really gets tricky is when you get to the last seam to put it all together, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay, so where are we now? We need to sew this one right here. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're lining up those raw edges, and we're gonna have the needle come just to the outside of the fabric. And part of the reason for that is to make sure that when that needle first comes down and then goes up and makes this first stitch, that it's hooking both pieces together, and both pieces are in an area where you've either faced it for the round parts or you've folded it under so that it's kind of self-facing for those pointed ones. We're going to line up the raw edges, and I'm going to take 2 stitches in, and then I'm going to back it up 1. A lot of repetition here, and then I'm just going to stitch down. And if you'll notice, my machine is not running as slow as it was when we were sewing those curves, but it's not race car speed either. Okay, let's take that pin out. And now we've taken those pieces and we have 8 blades together. And of course it's not pressed, so it's not going to lay nice and flat for you. But you can see that we are at a flat line here when we put them together. Now, you want to do this and you want to make 2 semicircles. And then when you do that, you can put those two together and we're going to have a complete plate. So here we go. And what we've done is we've substituted that white striped fabric for the black and white flowery on the first one. And then we're just going to sew these together. And we're going to do, you guessed it, the same thing again. We're going to line up that other one, that pointed one, so it just peeks out. And I think I have the same thing going on with this one, where it's just not, it's not giving me a nice little curve there. So let me adjust that just a little bit. And we're going to put a pin right there just to hold it. And then a pin down about 3/4 of the way down that raw edge. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to flip it over before I pin it so I can have that pointed piece just peeking out. And you see, let me give you something nice and bright here that you can look over. You can see that piece is just barely peeking out. And that's what we're looking for. So it's just a little bit bigger. And I think when we get the plate all together, you're really going to be able to tell that. And I have to adjust this one just a little bit because we want those raw edges together. And we're going to put a second pin in down here. And then we're going to get started. And we're going to do the same thing again. Start that needle just outside, 2 and back 1. And then we're just going to run it down, and we're letting that foot be our guide for a nice 1/4 inch seam. Just checking there to make sure we're still lined up. And a lot of times I would just run this over and do the other side, but I kind of want the stitching to start on the outside of the plate and run in. And the reason for that is, you remember I said we're not locking the stitch on the inside. If, when you put this together, you find that your blades are not laying flat, generally speaking, oh, I got that one just a little far above the edge of the fabric. Generally speaking, if you need to adjust it, the place you're going to adjust it is in the middle of the circle, not the outside. So if we don't lock those stitches in, we can either pick them out or we can rip them out on the inside to be able to adjust it. Now, if in doing this you found that the rounded blades were not something you enjoyed, or you did, maybe this is a skill that you've not perfected yet, just do the pointed ones. It'll be just as nice. It'll just have a little bit different look. And there we have our second plate all together. We just need to press it, and we would press that with some steam. We're going to press the seams open so that it lays nice and flat. And there you've got our two blades. Our two plates. And what we're going to do next is we're going to put them on a background fabric. I wanted to go ahead and do this step in this book so you can see how I go about that. And I've made some measurements, but I haven't cut anything yet. I wanted to take you on that journey. Now, for this project, we have two fabrics that we're going to use for the background prints. We have a bright, almost lime green, and then we have a, what I would say is a peacock blue. It's got a little bit of green in it. It's not a true blue, but it is like a peacock blue, and we're going to put those together. So I'm going to clear my table a little bit and get my machine out of the way, and I'm going to show you how I decided what size it needed to be and what the next step is. Hi, okay, we're going to be talking about our background fabrics now. I'm going to move this machine over just a little bit and how I decided which one to use. Now, our overall design is going to have 4 plates. It's going to have 2 like this and 2 like this. And then we're going to use 4 squares as the background that these plates sit on. And I studied these a good little bit about what colors I wanted to use with what. And here's what I decided. The darker plate is going on the green, and the lighter plate is going on the blue. And the reason I decided to do this is because that black in this plate is very, very dark. And the brighter vibrancy of the green counteracts that very dark plate to give us something that is enjoyable and pleasing to look at. The blue is not quite as vibrant as the green, but then again the plate is a little brighter. So we've kind of equaled those out with the 2 colors. Now, what size do we make it? Well, let's start with this one because that one's all sewn together and pressed. I used my square ruler to decide how much of the fabric I wanted to show around it. And I'm looking for a project that's about 30 to 35 inches big for just the 4 squares. And what I did was I decided that I was going to use a 13-inch square cut. Let me just make sure. That's right. Cut at 13 inches. So 13 inches on this is here. To here. And we're going to be cutting that in just a minute. But for right now, let's just kind of fold it to simulate what that square is going to look like. And it's going to be about that big. And then our plate is going to sit right in the middle of it. Now we will have 1/4 of an inch on all sides for our seam. So the square, and this is a little bit different from what you normally see on squares, the finished size of the square is going to be 12.5 inches. Usually they are cut at 12.5 and they finish at 12. This one's going to be just a little bit bigger because I wanted a good bit of the background to really show so that we get both the effect of the plate and the background on this. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to cut 2 squares 13 inches. And we want to make sure that we cut them accurately or just a smidgen bigger so we don't have any problems with that. And I got a yard of this fabric when I was purchasing it, so we're going to have plenty of fabric. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to take my nice long ruler, and I do enjoy a 24-inch ruler because usually you can sit it down on a piece of cut yardage and you can cut all the way across in one motion. And I did pre-wash this fabric. I ran it through the dryer and I pressed it afterwards. And it was one of those fabrics that was surprisingly crooked. Okay, let's grab our rotary tool. I think this is my sharpest one. We'll find out. And we've got it placed. What I've done was when I pressed it and folded it in half lengthwise, I tried to make sure that the selvages were lined up and the fabric laid straight so that when you held it up, it wasn't skewed to one side or the other. And that means that one side is an inch, cut an inch shorter than the other. So I'm going to line up my line here. That won't be absolutely perfectly square, but I think it will be close enough for us to get started. Whoops, and I'm way off the line there, got a little sloppy. Okay. Okay, we've cut that, and that's really not big enough to do anything with, so we're going to just toss that right away. And here we are. Now we need two 13-inch squares. So that our fabric is probably 40 to 42, something like that. So we're going to open it up so we don't waste any fabric. I could be the cheapest fabric person out there because I really dislike wasting fabric. There's always something that we can use that for, and I don't want to waste it. I'm not going to be Scrooge-ish with it, but I'm not going to waste it. Okay, so I've laid out, excuse me, I've laid out my square on the edge we just cut. And if you look at the threads in the fabric, I can tell that we're on the right track as far as being straight. I can't tell that we're running the same thread all the way down, but it's pretty close. So I'm on 13 inches here. I'm going to cut this side. And I'm going to cut just a little bit further. Okay, we're there. Now, I'm going to double check it. Now, my ruler, the line for 13 is on top of the fabric. It's not off the fabric, it's on top of the fabric. So I know that we, for sure, have 13 inches. And then I'm going to cut this way. And I'm going to keep cutting it straight because we're going to adjust this so that we can cut this way 13 inches. This is a 15-inch ruler, so we should be able to move 2 inches off. And we're going to make sure that that line is on the fabric now. Okay, and we should be able to cut. I'm going to have to reposition my chair just a little bit. Now, because of that weird angle, I did get off just a little bit. So this is going to have to be trimmed up. But this piece is good. There's a 13-inch square. Put that right there, and we're going to cut our second one. Now, we could have cut all the way across at 13, but let's say, for example, my plan changes and I need to use this green fabric for binding or maybe for a border. By not cutting that piece off, I have a longer strip of fabric that I could use in a binding or a border. And that can be sometimes a real help. Okay, I'm doing the same thing again. I'm lining up that bottom piece on the 13, so I can just take another little cut here to make sure that my line is straight, because I had that little boo-boo. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to move this over 2 inches now. So the line going up the side is inside the fabric and the line down here. So here we are. And look here, we've got the blue and the green washed together. So it's got blue thread on it. Okay, we're going to cut here. Trying to keep that blade right on the ruler. And then we're going to hold this snug. That's a bad idea. These rotary cutters are very sharp. And I almost made the mistake of cutting it with my left hand. I am not left-handed, and that could have been an accident waiting to happen. Okay, so there we go. Double check our measurements. 13 by 13. And we've got them together. Okay. And then we have this piece still hooked on that we can use for something else. I don't anticipate that I'm going to use this green again in this project, but you never know. So we're going to fold it back up and put it away. Usually if I'm working on a project, I like to keep everything together until I finish. And then that way, if it's something I wanted to make an accessory, or I decided, like we talked about in the very beginning, then maybe I want to make it bigger, I would have that fabric available to me to make it bigger. All right, the next step of our project is going to be putting our plate on our background fabric. Two things here are key. First thing I would do probably is iron this, and we also want to make sure that we find the center of the background and the center of the plate, and we're going to do them together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this diagonally. I'm going to finger press this right now, and there are some other ways we're going to do it, but I'm going to show you this first, and then I'm going to show you the other ways. So I folded it diagonally. I'm going to fold it the other way diagonally, and you want to make sure that you're pretty accurate with this. And you want to just crease your lines right in the center and then into the points are going to be the most important areas. So now you've got a fold line that intersects in the very center. And then I'm going to do it horizontally and vertically as well. That's going to be just a check. And I would do this at the point that you are ready to pin your plate on. Now, there are two other ways that you could go about this. And one way would be to iron those creases in. It's going to give you a sharper crease. It's going to last longer. But it's also going to be a little more difficult to iron out once you get everything in place. The other option would be to use a disappearing or water-soluble marker. That's going to stay in place longer than a fold or a crease unless you're in a real humid environment. And I know for me in the summertime that is problematic. But we're in the winter right now, turtleneck, so that's not much of an issue. But right now I have fold lines diagonally, horizontally, my vertical line, I can't really see that great, but we're going to move forward, and then for my final placement I will press these. I want to make sure that the points are up and down. You could do them diagonally or up and down. It's up to you. I think you might get a little bit, I tell you what, I'm going to change my mind, and I'll tell you why. Because I think it's important to know. Remember when we put the plate together, we elevated those pointed blades out just 1/4 of an inch. So those blades with the points are just a little bit longer. And we've got more room in the corners than we do on the sides. So I'm making a decision right here and now to change that. And that will also help us in making this really easy, because we're going to put the actual point of those pointy blades on that fold line in all 4 corners. And what that does is, if your plate is laying flat, it will center this in exactly the center. So we should be able to come along, and let me get a little square that's a little easier to handle. It's from another show there. Some bias tape. Oh, that's some sticky tape. Okay, so if we do a little quick check, we'll see that here on this side, It is just at an inch from the edge. And here on this side, it's a little bit more. I would say it's 1.25 inches. And then let's check this side. Oop, need to turn it around. That's about 1 inch. And it's a little harder for me to see. I think that one is a little bit more. So it's sitting a little bit this way and a little bit this way. So we're going to just slightly adjust it. We don't want to do it too much because if we do, we're going to take the points off the folds. So there we go. That is centered on there. At this point, you've got a couple of choices. I'm going to hand applique the plate onto the background. So I just need to pin it or baste it in place so it doesn't move. And to pin it, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to pin it here on the corners so that we keep those in place. And you'll see that those points are right on that line. And you see when I did that, I pulled it just slightly and pressed it down to make sure that there are no humps in either the background fabric or the plate. And then I'll probably stick a pin along this in the other blades. I don't know if I'll put a pin in every blade, but I'll put a pin in enough of them so that if I pick it up and I move it around, it's not going to get out of place. So that's our first block. And what I'll do is once I get the second plate ironed or pressed, I will cut blocks and do that as well. Now, before we meet again, my homework is to get 2 more plates made. And we're going to do it just the same way that I've shown you on the previous episode, the introduction to Dresden plates, and in this episode, we're just going to assemble the plate using the blades. And then we'll have 2 like this and 2 like this. And we will have, probably by the time we meet again, at least 1, if not 2 of these appliqued onto the background so we can see that. If we're really lucky, we might have all 4, but I'm not sure that I can get that much done to make 2 more plates and get them on before we meet again. If we do, that's great. If you're sewing along with us and you have any questions about how to make the blades, please refer back to our previous videos. You can find those in the playlist for Modern Dresden. If by chance we don't, and by we I mean I, don't get 2 of these sewn together, what we're going to do next weekend is our next video as a backup is we're going to start working on the border for this project. And I have something really fun. It's going to look really complicated and it's going to have a lot of cutting and seams, but I think I've got a way we can pull it off pretty quickly. We're going to put that together so that we can start on our border as well. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and check out that playlist for all the older videos. Or if you see something else you like here, check out that playlist so you can see how we did it as well. We look forward to seeing you next time here at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.